Hi, Alyssa. I hope you are getting through this stuff pretty easily. Um, I saw your email with your questions about hills like white elephants, and I know you probably already had to watch this or read through uh, these PowerPoints, but I think it's important to kind of review this stuff before we start talking about hills like white elephants. So, there are several theories of revision, and basically the first one is the top-down theory. This one's very self-explanatory, very easy to understand. It's you begin with revision, so you begin looking at the conceptual stuff, the big picture items. Do I need this character? Can these characters be combined? Can this character be cut? Can this scene be cut? Those sort of big picture, big concept items. Then you move down to editing and line editing, and then this is looking at the piece sentence by sentence, word by word, making sure that everything is clear and concise. There's no wordiness. It's as descriptive as possible without being wordy. It's vivid, it's interesting, it's compelling. Okay? And then the last step is proofreading, which we all know what that is. That's the final pass through, making sure that all your commas are in the right place and there are no, spelling errors, anything like that. Now, the next theory of revision is Stephen King's theory, which he lays this out in On Writing, the book that you were supposed to read over the course of this semester. Now, Uh, King's theory is that every subsequent draft should be 10% shorter than the previous. Now, this doesn't mean you chop off 5% at the beginning and 5% at the ending. This is going through the draft, in a very minute way. This might be cutting a sentence here, cutting a paragraph there, cutting a few words from this sentence, whatever. But the ultimate goal of revision, according to King, is that each draft should be 10% shorter than the previous one. Okay? And then we come to Hemingway's iceberg theory. And hills like white elephants, we're going to go through your questions for hills like white elephants. But hills like white elephants is a perfect example of Hemingway's iceberg theory, which is that it's just as important to read what isn't written, if that makes sense. So there's the words on the page, but then you have to sort of extrapolate what the characters are thinking, doing, saying, even when there aren't words on the page to describe those things. So Hemingway always said that if you know enough about what you're writing about, the reader will put the pieces together. Now, his ultimate exercise in doing this is the story Hills Like White Elephants. And we will talk about it because clearly you are on the right track based off your questions, but you need just a little bit of help to kind of get the full picture. So according to Hemingway, what is actually written on the page is only 30% of the story. The other 70% is what the reader either pieces together, fabricates in their own mind, interprets from what is written, all those things. Okay? Hold on, I gotta go down here. So here's my little crappy diagram of Hemingway's iceberg theory. So up here, the literal words on the page. Then over here, we have what's below the surface are the themes, the deeper meanings, the subtleties, the objective correlatives. We'll talk about objective correlatives. But altogether, this is all the information conveyed in the story. We're skipping that, because you know what that is, skipping that. So Hemingway was a big proponent of subtlety in writing. He always said, show, don't tell. Show the reader action, show the reader tension. and then let the reader figure out what all of this means. All right? So this leads us to objective correlatives. Now, the official definition of an objective correlative is this here, which is god-awful. All right? So the official definition is something as a situation or chain of events that symbolizes or objectifies a particular emotion and that may be used in creative writing to evoke a desired emotional response in the reader. So what is an objective correlative? They have their place in almost all forms of writing except for research papers. They help develop themes, and they force the reader to be more active when they read. It forces them to be more attentive, to be more attentive and to be more thoughtful and analytical. Hemingway was the master of the objective correlative. This is why you probably struggled with Hills Like White Elephants, because of the objective correlatives. Now, before we start talking about objective correlatives, I'm going to give you an example. So you see this all the time in the movies. All right, so it's a funeral. Everybody's dressed in black, carrying their black umbrellas. It's raining. They're standing around the cemetery. The sky's gray. It's raining. The widower, steps up to the casket, places her hand on the casket. It's still raining. It's still, it's starting to, it's still raining. It's still cloudy. So at this point, we're supposed to feel sad. All right. It's very rare that in a movie that a funeral takes place on a bright sunny day. Okay, keep that in mind. So now the widower is turning away from the casket, and she begins walking through the headstones. She's leaving. She walks through the headstones and comes across a small yellow flower. And this small yellow flower is, just in the middle of the grass near a headstone. And all of a sudden, the clouds begin to break, and a ray of light shines down on this beautiful golden yellow flower, and a single drop of water runs off the flower, and then the scene ends. What do you think that might mean? I wish you were here to answer. But ultimately, what this whole scene is meant to convey is that, there's sadness, she's lost her husband, but then with this flower at the end and the sun shining on it, and this beautiful beam of light shining on it, that it symbolizes, hope, possibly, or that life continues, possibly. There are several different ways we can interpret that, but nobody says these things in the movie. It's just a chain of events, a chain of images, okay? And Hemingway was the master of that. All right, now I want to pull up your question, and we'll specifically discuss your questions and how they relate to Hills Like White Elephants. So just give me a second to read through your email again. All right. So let's break down the story. I don't have it in front of me. Let's break it down the best I can possibly remember without my notes. So, the American and the girl, they're at a train station in Barcelona, I believe, right? I believe you said that. And yeah, they're drinking beer and waiting for their next train. Now, at one point, and it quickly becomes clear that they're talking about an operation. He wants her to have the operation. She's not so sure. He wants her to have the operation. she's not so sure, but that changes by the end of the story. Now, there are a few objective correlatives that point out what this really means. So, the woman makes a comment early on that the hills look like white elephants. Now, think of rolling white hills and what that could symbolize. Could symbolize pregnant bellies, maybe. Then the woman walks to the edge of the train tracks and looks out. So she's here at the edge of the train tracks. Right in front of her are the train tracks. Then there's a fence. And then on the other side of the fence is all of these fertile fields that are growing fruit and are growing vegetables, all that. And just beyond the fields is the white hills. So she is actually, there's a barrier between her and fertility, if you think of it that way. She goes back to her seat, and at one point she reaches out. There's a bead curtain near her. She reaches out, grabs 2 strings of beads, holds them in her hand, and just looks at them. Just thinks about these 2 strings of beads. Now, at this point, I would ask you what that could possibly mean, but it's her holding these 2 strings of beads, 2 separate entities coming together to create something else, okay? And then by the end of the story, the girl reluctantly agrees to have the operation done. So, I'm not going to tell you what this is about. I'm going to have you email me. It can even be one word. What is the operation they're talking about? I'm going to have you email it to me and see if you got it right. Okay?